The maintenance bay door was locked from the inside, yet no one was supposed to be there. Flight mechanic James Harlow heard footsteps echo across metal flooring where only silence should exist at 3 in the morning. But what he discovered in the cargo hold of that Boeing 747 wasn't an intruder. It was a passenger from Flight 819, a flight that had crashed in the North Atlantic 30 years earlier with no survivors. My name is Richard Keller. I've been investigating aviation anomalies for the Federal Aviation Administration for 27 years. What I'm about to share violates several non-disclosure agreements, but the public deserves to know what happened at Hartsfield International Maintenance Bay 4 in the early hours of November 12, 2022. The incident began when senior mechanic James Harlow was performing routine maintenance on a 747 that had reported unusual pressure fluctuations during its previous 3 flights. The aircraft had been grounded for inspection after landing from Tokyo. According to the maintenance log, Harlow had checked the environmental control systems, cabin pressurization components, and was preparing to sign off on the work when he first heard what he described as shuffling footsteps coming from the rear cargo section. At first, I thought it was another mechanic, Harlow told me when I interviewed him 3 days after the incident. But I knew I was alone in the bay. The hangar supervisor confirmed no one else was scheduled to be there until 6 a.m. Harlow initially dismissed the sounds as normal aircraft settling. Metal contracts as it cools, and a recently landed aircraft can make various noises for hours afterward as thermal equilibrium establishes. But then came 3 distinct footsteps, followed by what Harlow described as a wet, dragging sound. Airport security footage confirms that Harlow was indeed alone in the maintenance bay. All external doors remained locked, with keycard access showing no entries after Harlow's arrival at 11:48 p.m. This is the first inconsistency that caught my attention. Harlow reported taking his flashlight and walking toward the cargo hold, calling out to see if anyone would respond. The cargo area of a 747 is substantial, over 6,000 cubic feet of space, and poorly lit when the aircraft is powered down for maintenance. According to his statement, Harlow entered the forward cargo compartment, found nothing unusual, and proceeded to the rear hold. That's when the temperature in the bay dropped so suddenly that the security camera lenses fogged over for approximately 47 seconds. I could see my breath, Harlow said. It went from normal hangar temperature, about 65 degrees, to what felt like freezing in seconds. And there was this smell, like seawater and something else. Something rotten. When he directed his flashlight toward the rear corner of the cargo hold, Harlow saw what he initially thought was another mechanic in a soaked uniform. The figure was standing with its back to him, water pooling around its feet on the metal flooring. But the uniform wasn't that of airport personnel. It was a passenger's clothing, torn, soaking wet, and bearing the unmistakable logo of Oceanic Airlines, a carrier that had ceased operations in 1993, precisely 1 year after the crash of Flight 819. I said, "Hey, you can't be in here," Harlow recalled, his voice breaking during our interview. And that's when it turned around. The security footage resumed clarity at this point, but shows only Harlow backing rapidly out of the cargo hold, dropping his flashlight, and activating the emergency evacuation alarm. What the cameras don't show is what Harlow saw when the figure turned to face him. His eyes were wrong, completely black, like filled with ink, and his skin, it was pale, but had this blue-green tint, like someone who'd been in water too long. But the worst part was his mouth. When he opened it to speak, seawater poured out, not dripping, pouring, like a faucet, and small things were moving in it, like tiny fish or crustaceans. Harlow, a 20-year veteran of aircraft maintenance with an impeccable record and no history of mental health issues, was so disturbed by what he saw that he refused to return to the maintenance bay. Security personnel who responded to the alarm found no intruder, but documented 2 unusual findings that corroborated parts of Harlow's account. First, a large puddle of water was discovered on the cargo hold floor, approximately 2 gallons in volume. Initial tests identified it as seawater, with a salinity and mineral content consistent with North Atlantic Ocean water. More disturbing were the biological components found in the sample. Microorganisms native to deep ocean environments, specifically from regions near the crash site of Flight 819, at depths exceeding 20,000 feet. Second, written in what appeared to be condensation on the inside of the cargo hold wall was a partial passenger manifest number matching one of the victims from Flight 819, PAX 293. But then the evidence began to vanish. The water evaporated at an accelerated rate, disappearing completely before proper containment protocols could be implemented. The condensation writing faded within minutes, leaving only trace evidence that something had been there. By morning, physical evidence had been reduced to a few swabs containing salt residue and microscopic marine biological material. Most concerning, however, was the unexplained disappearance of the initial security footage. When I requested the recordings from airport security the following day, only an 18-minute gap remained where the original footage should have been. An IT security specialist confirmed that the files have been deleted by someone with administrative access at 5:17 a.m., nearly 2 hours after the incident. Flight 819 has long been considered one of aviation's more straightforward tragedies. The Oceanic Airlines Boeing 737 departed from Boston Logan International Airport at 11:23 p.m. on March 7, 1992, bound for London Heathrow. At approximately 2:56 a.m. Eastern Time, the aircraft reported an electrical system failure followed by a complete communications blackout. Radar contact was lost at 3:12 a.m., approximately 700 miles northeast of Newfoundland. Search and rescue operations recovered minimal debris and no survivors among the 186 passengers and crew. Accident investigators determined that catastrophic electrical failure, possibly caused by a lightning strike, had disabled critical flight systems, resulting in the aircraft's uncontrolled descent into the North Atlantic. The wreckage was never located, presumed to have sunk in waters exceeding 15,000 feet in depth. Case closed, until James Harlow's encounter reopened questions that had been buried along with the victims for 3 decades. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that it wasn't isolated. After gaining access to confidential maintenance records, I discovered that 17 similar incidents had been reported across 6 different airlines and 9 maintenance facilities over the past 30 years. All involved maintenance personnel encountering unexplained phenomena in or around aircraft that had either flown near the Flight 819 crash site or contained salvaged parts from aircraft that had. In 2004, a maintenance technician at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris reported seeing a passenger in outdated clothing walking through the cabin of an aircraft undergoing overnight maintenance. The passenger disappeared when approached, leaving behind only a trail of water. In 2011, 2 ground crew members at Frankfurt Airport independently reported encountering a man in wet clothing attempting to board an aircraft during pre-flight checks, despite the boarding bridge not yet being connected. In both cases, the descriptions matched passenger Robert Keller, a business executive who had been seated in 16C on Flight 819. But when Harlow described the passenger he'd encountered, his description matched another victim, Dr. Malcolm Foster, a marine biologist who had been returning from a research expedition. Foster had been seated in 23A and was one of the few passengers whose personal effects, specifically a waterlogged research journal, were recovered from the crash site. The coincidence seemed too precise to dismiss. But what happened next transformed this from an unsettling mystery into something far more disturbing. 3 days after the incident, while the investigation was still active, James Harlow disappeared. His car was found in the airport employee parking lot, his apartment untouched. Security footage showed him entering the same maintenance bay at 11:34 p.m., outside his scheduled hours, but no footage exists of him leaving. The maintenance bay door was once again locked from the inside when the morning shift arrived, with Harlow nowhere to be found. The only evidence of his presence was a small puddle of water on the cargo hold floor, identical in composition to the sample from 3 nights earlier, and a single waterlogged employee ID badge. I interviewed Harlow's supervisor, Michael Donnelly, who shared something Harlow had told him just hours before his disappearance. He said the passenger had spoken to him. Just 3 words, "Still not found." This phrase carries particular significance in the context of Flight 819. During the official investigation, several family members of victims reported receiving phone calls from their deceased loved ones in the weeks following the crash. In each call, the same three words were reportedly spoken before the line went dead: still not found. The official explanation was grief-induced hallucination or cruel hoaxes perpetrated against mourning families. But the consistency of the message across unrelated individuals suggested something more. What if still not found wasn't referring to the passengers, but to the aircraft itself? This brings me to the most troubling aspect of Flight 819, the discrepancies in the debris field. Salvage operations recovered approximately 8% of the expected wreckage, far below the typical recovery rate for crashes in similar water depths. More puzzling were the patterns of damage on the recovered components. The deformation and fracture patterns on several key structural elements were inconsistent with impact damage, instead showing signs of what one investigator described as expansion stress, as if the aircraft had been torn apart from the inside. Additionally, metallurgical analysis of the recovered debris showed unusual molecular changes in the aluminum alloy components. The crystalline structure had been altered in a way that materials engineers could not readily explain, exhibiting properties consistent with exposure to extreme pressure, far exceeding what would be experienced during a standard ocean impact. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a materials scientist who examined the debris, noted in her classified report, the molecular restructuring observed in these components would typically require pressures exceeding those found at ocean depths of 30,000 feet, well beyond the crash site's measured depth. Alternatively, such changes could result from extreme temperature differentials or exposure to unknown environmental factors not consistent with a conventional crash scenario. Her report was filed, classified, and effectively buried until my investigation brought it back to light. The official accident report makes no mention of these anomalies. Instead, it focuses on the more palatable explanation of electrical failure and pilot disorientation. But the evidence suggests something far more inexplicable may have occurred to Flight 819, something that continues to manifest through encounters like James Harlow's. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case emerged when I located Sophie Harlow, James's sister, 2 weeks after his disappearance. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her home in Charlotte, visibly nervous and checking over her shoulder throughout our conversation. "James called me the night he disappeared," she said, her hands trembling around her untouched cup of coffee. "He sounded different, distant. He told me he'd figured it out, that Flight 819 never crashed. He said, 'They're in between, Sophie, not crashed, just displaced, and now they're finding ways back.'" When I asked her to clarify what she thought he meant, she slid her phone across the table. On it was the last text message James had sent her at 12:17 a.m., approximately 43 minutes after security cameras show him entering the maintenance bay for the final time. The message contained just 5 words and a series of coordinates. The plane exists in between. 41 degrees, 43 minutes, 55 seconds N. 49 degrees, 56 minutes W. These coordinates point to a location in the North Atlantic approximately 250 miles from the last known position of Flight 819. More significantly, they mark a region known among oceanographers as the Atlantic Shadow, an area where electronic equipment frequently malfunctions, compass readings become unreliable, and where several vessels have reported unusual temporal anomalies. Sophie then revealed something that sent a chill through me. 3 nights after James disappeared, I received a phone call from his number. When I answered, all I could hear was the sound of rushing water and what sounded like airplane engines in the background. Then a voice, not James's, said those same 3 words, "Still not found." I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. 2 days after our meeting, Sophie Harlow also disappeared. Her home showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. The only unusual element was a puddle of seawater found on her bedroom floor. I took the coordinates from James's final message to Dr. Raymond Chen, an oceanographer specializing in North Atlantic deep water anomalies. His response was unexpected. We call that region the temporal pocket. It's a zone where our equipment registers chronological inconsistencies. Time seems to flow at a slightly different rate within this specific area. We've measured variances of up to 0.03%, which sounds insignificant until you realize that no known physical phenomenon should cause time itself to fluctuate. When I pressed him on whether such a phenomenon could be related to the disappearance of Flight 819, he grew uncomfortable. Theoretically, if an aircraft entered a severe enough temporal distortion, the effects on its structural integrity and electrical systems would be catastrophic. Metal would fatigue instantaneously, electrical systems would fail, and the pressure differential could, well, it could essentially tear the aircraft between two different time frames. "And the passengers?" I asked. Dr. Chen was silent for several moments before answering. "If we're entertaining this highly speculative scenario, they would exist in a state of temporal flux, neither fully in our time frame nor completely separated from it, essentially trapped between moments." 2 weeks after speaking with Dr. Chen, I received an unmarked package at my office. Inside was a waterlogged logbook, its pages barely legible from water damage and age. The handwriting matched that of Captain Robert Whitman, the pilot of Flight 819. The final entry, time-stamped at 3:11 a.m., 1 minute before radar contact was lost, contained a single line: "Breaking through clouds. Unusual light formation ahead. Not lightning. Ocean visible, but wrong. Water appears solid, like glass. Time on instruments moving backward." The logbook should not exist. According to the official investigation, the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were never recovered, and no other documentation survived the crash. I arranged for the logbook to be authenticated by forensic document specialists, who confirmed both the age of the paper and ink as well as Captain Whitman's handwriting, based on samples provided by his family. The water damaging the logbook wasn't standard seawater. It contained the same deep ocean microorganisms found in the puddles at the maintenance bay and in Sophie Harlow's bedroom. 5 days after receiving the logbook, I was approached by a current Oceanic Airlines mechanic who requested anonymity. He revealed that certain aircraft components recovered from crash sites are routinely salvaged and redistributed throughout the industry after being recertified, a common but rarely publicized practice. According to his records, 17 components recovered from the Flight 819 debris field had been recertified and installed in various aircraft between 1994 and 2017. "Here's the thing that keeps me up at night," he told me, glancing nervously around the parking garage where we'd arranged to meet. "Every single aircraft that received those parts has reported at least one incident of unexplained electrical activity, pressurization anomalies, or crew members hearing voices or footsteps in empty cabins. 3 of those aircraft have since been involved in accidents, though none fatal." He handed me a maintenance log that had been deliberately excluded from official records. It detailed an incident in 2005 where an oxygen mask deployed by itself in an empty cabin during a maintenance check. When the mechanic went to reset it, he reported feeling a cold, wet hand grasp his wrist, though no one was visible. The aircraft contained a recertified hydraulic actuator salvaged from Flight 819. "We don't talk about it," the mechanic said, "but everyone knows. Those parts are contaminated somehow, like they're still connected to whatever happened to that flight." The theory forming in my mind was too outlandish for conventional accident investigation, yet the evidence kept pointing in the same unsettling direction. What if Flight 819 had encountered something in that region of the North Atlantic that didn't just destroy the aircraft, but somehow displaced it from our conventional understanding of time and space? The scattered debris, the molecular changes in the metal components, the consistent reports of water and apparitions, the temporal anomalies reported in the area, they all suggested something beyond a standard crash scenario. And then came the final piece that transformed speculation into chilling possibility. 3 months into my investigation, I received an anonymous email containing sonar imaging data collected by a private research vessel that had been mapping the ocean floor near the coordinates from James Harlow's final message. The images showed something large and unmistakably man-made, resting at a depth of 17,000 feet, a depth consistent with the pressure damage observed on the recovered debris. But what made the images truly remarkable wasn't the object itself, but its condition. Despite 30 years in the crushing depths of the North Atlantic, the outline clearly visible on the sonar was unmistakably intact, a complete aircraft with minimal structural damage. The dimensions matched a Boeing 737. More disturbing was the attached audio file, a hydrophone recording captured in the vicinity of the wreckage. Beneath the expected sounds of deep ocean currents and marine life was something impossible, the rhythmic hum of electrical systems, and faintly but unmistakably, what sounded like the muffled voices of multiple people. The file was time-stamped May 18, 2022, 30 years after Flight 819 had vanished. I sent the audio to 3 independent acoustic analysts, none of whom were told the origin of the recording. All 3 confirmed the presence of active electrical systems and human voices, though the words were indecipherable. One analyst noted that the acoustic properties of the voices exhibited unusual patterns, as if the sound waves themselves were temporally distorted, stretching and compressing in ways that defied normal acoustic physics. When I attempted to contact the research vessel that had provided the data, I discovered it had disappeared during a subsequent expedition to the same coordinates 3 weeks after recording the sonar images. All 17 crew members remain missing. The last communication from the vessel, a fragmented radio transmission, contained only ambient noise and, in the final seconds, 3 words: "Still not found." By this point, it was clear that my investigation had attracted unwanted attention. My office was broken into twice, though nothing was taken. My computer showed signs of sophisticated intrusion attempts. I began receiving phone calls from blocked numbers where all I could hear was the sound of rushing water and distant mechanical noises. Then came the warning: a hand-delivered envelope containing a single page with a message typed in courier font. Investigation terminated. Flight 819 remains classified Umbra-level incident. Evidence contaminated. Temporal contagion risk assessed at level 4. Cease inquiry immediately. The term temporal contagion stood out. It isn't part of any known aviation safety or investigation protocol. Yet here it was, on an apparently official document, warning me away from an investigation into a 30-year-old accident. I took the document to a contact at the National Transportation Safety Board, who confirmed it didn't match any known official formatting, but contained security classification terminology consistent with highly restricted aerospace anomaly protocols. "This isn't about covering up negligence or mechanical failure," my contact said, after swearing me to secrecy. "Some incidents get classified not because we know what happened, but because we don't, and what we suspect is too dangerous to acknowledge publicly." When I asked about temporal anomalies in aviation incidents, my contact grew visibly uncomfortable. There are files, cases where the physical evidence contradicts every known law of physics, where recovered components show signs of aging far beyond or significantly less than what the timeline should allow, where cockpit recordings contain conversations that go on for hours after the aircraft has already crashed. We catalog them, classify them, and then we bury them, because what else can we do? I was given access to a heavily redacted file that referenced something called Project Kronos, apparently a joint FAA-NASA initiative established in 1987 to investigate anomalous aerospace incidents involving potential temporal fractures. Flight 819 was listed as a Category A incident under this project, though most other details were redacted. The final page contained a single unredacted paragraph that has continued to haunt me. Current theory suggests that in cases of severe temporal displacement, subjects may exist simultaneously across multiple timeframes with gradual degradation of the primary temporal anchor. In layman's terms, they are unstuck in time, predominantly existing in their displaced state, but occasionally manifesting partially in our time frame. As their displaced state deteriorates, these manifestations may increase in frequency and duration, potentially resulting in full reintegration of subjects into standard temporal flow, though in a physically altered state consistent with their experience in the displaced environment. In other words, the passengers of Flight 819 might be coming back. This brings us to the most recent and perhaps most disturbing development in this ongoing mystery. 2 weeks ago, air traffic controllers at Boston Logan International Airport received a transmission on an emergency frequency. The voice, distorted by static but clearly audible, identified itself as Captain Robert Whitman of Oceanic Airlines Flight 819, requesting emergency landing clearance. The timestamp on the recording was 3:14 a.m., exactly 30 years to the minute after Flight 819 disappeared. The controller, understandably confused, responded that no such flight existed in their system. The voice replied, "We've been circling it's difficult to tell. Instruments aren't functioning normally. Passengers are changing. Something's wrong with the air, with the light outside. We can see your runway, but it keeps shifting. Please clear all approaches. We're coming in regardless. We've been gone too long." Radar operators reported no aircraft in the vicinity, yet the transmission continued for approximately 27 seconds before abruptly cutting out mid-sentence as the voice was saying, "The water is rising inside the cabin. We need to..." Since that transmission, 19 maintenance workers across 13 different airports have reported encounters with soaking wet passengers attempting to board aircraft, specifically those scheduled to fly over the North Atlantic. In each case, the individuals disappeared when approached, leaving only puddles of seawater containing the now familiar deep ocean microorganisms. Most concerning are the 5 passengers on actual flights who have reported sitting next to individuals who weren't recorded on the passenger manifest, weren't observed by flight attendants, and who disappeared midway through the flight, leaving behind only wet seats and, in one case, a waterlogged boarding pass for Oceanic Airlines Flight 819. The coordinates James Harlow provided in his final message now show increased electromagnetic activity. Research vessels report equipment failures when approaching within 20 nautical miles. Satellite imagery occasionally shows what analysts describe as a visual distortion over these exact coordinates, a circular area approximately 3 miles in diameter where the ocean surface appears to ripple and shift in patterns inconsistent with normal wave activity. Yesterday, I received one final piece of evidence that convinced me to release this information despite the warnings and potential consequences. A package delivered to my home contained a waterlogged passport belonging to James Harlow. Inside was a handwritten note in unfamiliar handwriting. "We're still flying. Time moves differently here. The water keeps rising but never fills the cabin completely. Some have found ways to step back through, but only briefly. They're watching for us now. Don't let them cover this up. We are still not found, but we're finding our way back. Coordinates remain the key. 30 years for you." For us, the descent never ended. The truth about Flight 819 and what happened to its 186 passengers and crew remains obscured by classification, intimidation, and the limits of our understanding of physics. But the evidence suggests something far beyond a simple crash, something that continues to breach the boundaries between whatever state the flight exists in and our reality. Each salvaged part seems to serve as an anchor point. Each encounter with a soaking wet passenger or crew member represents a momentary thinning of whatever barrier separates us from them. The increasing frequency of these incidents suggests that whatever happened to Flight 819 30 years ago may be reaching some kind of culmination. As I conclude this report, I must acknowledge the risk in making this information public. Already, my home has been surveilled, my communications monitored. Twice, I've returned to find puddles of seawater in my living room, though all doors and windows remained locked. Last night, my phone rang at exactly 3:12 a.m., the precise time Flight 819 disappeared from radar. When I answered, I heard only the sound of rushing water and distant, muffled screams. I don't know what happened to James Harlow, Sophie Harlow, or the research vessel that discovered the wreckage. I don't know what's happening to the passengers and crew of Flight 819, trapped in whatever state of existence they now inhabit. But I know that something impossible occurred 30 years ago in that section of the North Atlantic, and its consequences continue to ripple through our reality. The official investigation into Flight 819 was closed in 1993. Perhaps it's time to reopen it, not as an aviation disaster, but as something far more mysterious and unsettling. If the passengers are indeed finding ways back, the question becomes not what happened to them, but what happens next. What would you do if you encountered a passenger from a flight that crashed 30 years ago, still soaking wet, still trying to complete their journey? Do you believe this is merely a series of coincidences and misidentifications, or evidence of something far beyond our understanding of reality? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more investigations into aviation mysteries that you won't find reported anywhere else. The truth about Flight 819 may be stranger and closer than we're prepared to accept.